3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Welcome to the Remote Photography Podcast. In this episode, I speak to photographer Dean McCarten about his remote photography experiences. Enjoy the podcast. Hi Dean, thanks for doing the podcast. If people don't know who you are, can you give a brief description of your career?
Yep, sure. So professionally, I work in cybersecurity, but obviously I'm a photographer as well. I'm a disabled photographer. I have cerebral palsy, which affects my left side, so obviously makes photography interesting, and obviously adds a different slant to being remote.
So over the course of your photography, how did you find out about remote shooting? Was it right at the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, it was quite close to the beginning of the pandemic. I forget who it was originally, but I'd seen it advertised, and I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. And then obviously, as the first lockdown started continuing, obviously a lot more models, some that I'd already worked with in person previously, started offering it. So it was something that I was keen to do as a way of still being creative while being stuck at home, but also a way to still sort of connect and be creative with my friends. I think that's one thing I'm very grateful for, is a lot of the models that I've worked with. I've actually worked with in person, and I'd consider them very good friends. So from that point of view, it was good to obviously help support them as well as do something creative. I mean, obviously from a practical perspective, for me, remote shooting is very enabling, because obviously I do have a disability, so my left side is weak, I think is the word, but obviously I don't have full dexterity in my left side. So obviously in person creates its own set of challenges, which I enjoy, because it means that not only do I have to consider the shot, obviously how I'm going to do it, how to pose the model, but also the logistics of me actually getting into position as well can sometimes not be as easy as you would first think. So obviously that's a consideration. Obviously when you're dealing with, you're just connecting via your computer, that obviously gives a very different slant to it, because obviously my physical limitations are no longer an issue. It's more to do with how can I be creative with the setup that the model has. I've got a great amount of appreciation for the effort and planning that goes into remote shoots with models, because it's taken a lot of the stuff that I would have to pre-plan and prepare for on a studio shoot, and they have to do it effectively for me, which obviously takes a bit of time. So obviously I expect that with remote shooting, that the number of shots you may get is vastly reduced compared to in person. But then again, the quality can be pretty much almost consistent. So you're almost getting a perfect shot every time. And then you have the hard time of choosing which ones to use.
That's true. With yourself and Mickey, that's something I really want to bring to the forefront, because
it's an interesting one.
Yeah. You've sort of said how you found out about doing remote photography, didn't you? So
I blame Rochelle. She was the one that encouraged me to pick up my camera again after a number of years, which is what led to me to be restarting doing photography in the first place. And it's all sort of spun out from there.
Well, did you see the one Rochelle did with me, or was it?
Yeah, well, I've done one with Rochelle, but I've known Rochelle for a little while.
Okay.
So it was just through one of our conversations when she was saying that she was doing events. I think it was a shot she'd post online and made a comment about it, and then from that she kind of said, well, you really should pick up your camera again. And sign up to Purple Part. And so I did, and kind of made myself sort of beginning of 2020, thought, right, well, I'm going to start focusing on sides of photography I'd never sort of really touched before, beyond sort of family stuff. And then thought, right, I want to start learning studio lighting and working with people. And so that's kind of how it kind of all started. And then from there, obviously my first shoot was with the forever gorgeous and funny Nicole Rayner, and obviously Ivana and Stephanie. So I got to meet all of them at the same time when the photography show was cancelled last year. And that was how it all kind of started, really. And from there, obviously it's an expensive hobby, but it's rewarding. It's different from my day job. It's much more creative. I get to play around with ideas, sort of wing it, just kind of throw a few ideas out and see what people think. And I always try and make sure that the models have, they can bring their ideas to the party, and we can just kind of throw about ideas and just try stuff. I tend to find the best way to do it is to, if somebody has an idea, is to just give it a go. As long as everyone's sort of safe, comfortable, and happy, then as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. I don't think there's need to be sort of conscribed to any sort of particular brief. I know a lot of models prefer to have like a mood board and stuff so they can help plan their outfits and stuff. I'm more just let's see how we feel on the day. Because obviously one thing I do say to models, because it's quite true, is that just because a model works up to a certain level does not always mean that they want to work it with that any one particular photographer. So I always say, we'll see how things go. We might try this if you feel comfortable with me. I'm very fortunate that I've never really had any models not want to work with me, and I'm very lucky to know the ones that I do. Yeah, and I basically just try and make sure it's have fun, making sure the model's safe and comfortable, happy, and then we just try and have fun with it. I think once you kind of meet them requirements, the rest of it just kind of comes together. I don't think there's any need for anything more than that. That's kind of just my style, and we'll just try stuff. I mean, obviously working with the likes of Pippa and Nemo, we get to do some funky stuff. We'll try things, whether it works or not. We'll have a laugh. I was looking to be the second remote shoot for Abigail Marie a few months ago, and obviously it was the first time we'd shot together at all. And to be fair, I think I have more photos of that shoot of her basically in stitches, laughing, than I think I do of her actually being sort of perfectly composed. But I think that sometimes is the fun of it. I know everyone has their own sort of style. I just tend to find story time and making sure people are having fun is the key element, because I just think everyone should have fun doing shoots because it's a fun thing to do. I think that's maybe the upside, is because I'm not doing it necessarily commercially. There's not the same sort of requirement on me to be getting, I suppose, that shot. But obviously when you get to work with people like Michelle, you can easily spend an hour just getting that one shot. And through the course of a number of these remote shoots, I've had people that I've met in person, and literally like the first half an hour minimum of almost every remote shoot is just catching up. It's just checking in with people, seeing how they're doing, having a little natter about how things are going. And there's a lot of models doing remote shoots from around the world now, and it's quite exciting because you get to work with people you never typically would think to try and work with. And it just opens the world of possibilities, especially when it's remote and all you need is an internet connection and a mobile. It's a very basic set of equipment, but obviously you can go as elaborate to an entire studio shoot, so you've got from one extreme to the other.
So you mentioned quite a few models that you've worked with during remote shoots. What countries, and if you know some of the names of the models off the top of your head, have you worked with?
I've got a few. Obviously, I've worked with about 3 models in the US, which obviously is Michaela, Scarlett, and Alexa. From Europe, there's obviously been quite a mix. Who I've shot a few times, and I think the rest have been UK models, ones that I've wanted to work with and not had the time to schedule, obviously with my work commitments keeping me busy and traveling around. Sometimes scheduling in-person shoots is a little bit logistically a nightmare, because I don't always know where I'm going to be at any one particular week to the next, which is obviously a minor problem. And obviously trying to work out logistics with models in studios, it's not always ideal. So I was very lucky to get to work with, obviously, Callum Monaco, Artemis Fauna, work again with Natalie Oliver as well as Charlie Rolls. The list in the UK is quite extensive, and obviously Ivana, Rochelle. To be fair, there's so many that I've been very, very fortunate to work with. Obviously Jade as well. So I've been lucky enough to meet some people that I've never shot with in person doing remote shoots, and I'm so excited to get the chance now. Lockdowns are easing up to hopefully get to shoot with them in person, because it's just been so much fun, pushing what is possible doing remote shoots, because you would think, well, there is maybe some limitations in what you can do, because obviously the technical setup requirements are, as there's only so much you can do in regards to a tethered setup, and the models having to constantly move around, so you want to change from landscape to portrait, adjust heights and stuff. A lot of the time, unless you've got someone there to really assist in putting a tripod into the same way, you do have to work the angles a little bit and the setup around it. There are one or two interesting people out there that are doing it a little different. Obviously Team Black being one, obviously Angel and Jay Black. I did a shoot with them where John was very kind enough to actually freehold the camera for me, so we could get into an angle that I wanted but wasn't able to do from a tripod. So there are ways around this. I'm in the same as well with Mr. Summers. Poor Mr. Summers having to hang over a set of stairs while Rochelle and I try and get that killer shot. I mean, the guy, must have guns like Arnie after that, because that was a lot of fun. And obviously we were using a very long tether cable as well to to run up the stairs. Yeah, we spent a lot of time getting that one shot, and it was it was gorgeous. It's a lot of fun, constant laughing, readjusting, trying things. But in the case of stuff like that, sometimes it was literally just a try and experiment. We managed to get an active, live bare bulb in there as well, which just had that much more of a softer glow to it. To be fair, there wasn't a massive amount of editing to do on that one because it was pretty much perfect straight out of the camera. So yeah, it's really interesting, the various different types of remote shoot. I mean, moving to the other end of the scale. I've done several cloth related remote shoots using iPhones, and even on location with Michaela, obviously in Turks and Caicos, obviously in the Caribbean. So we actually had it, we're at the beach, and we got some fun shots in the water, obviously with support of her partner to sort of hold the camera while we're doing that. So there's very different ways you can do remote shooting depending on sort of the support and the collaboration, as well as obviously offering full tethered sort of setup. So there's ways to do it across the thing, and obviously most models have extensive wardrobes, which is very useful when doing remote shoots because they can quickly change and they know what they have access to, and it's a bit different than being in a studio where they've got to pack what they think they're going to need, whereas at the home it literally is a case of them just going to the wardrobe and finding it, which offers a lot of options. But obviously it can be a challenge for some models, and I've seen that where they haven't had the perfect space to shoot in, and some of it just requires a little bit of creativity in how you do in the angles of pausing, as well as utilizing the space available, the amount of varying looks that Charlie gets on her remote shoots, and there are a lot. Obviously, having shot with her in person, I'm aware of the space they're using, and when you suddenly see that in person, you can kind of see how versatile they've made the space with the various backdrops and the looks. And I was very fortunate to be involved in a group shoot where Charlie had a makeup artist do her up as the Ice Queen. And that was such an interesting look. And, even though the images straight from the camera were so, were gorgeous to begin with, the fact that there's so many different takes I could take as an editor from that image, obviously, turning more to the blue tones in order to, really create that Ice Queen sort of vibe with the silver on her face. And it was such an interesting thing to sort of sit back and think, once I'd even taken the photos, what you actually arrive with. And I think it's been an interesting experience for most models to have, the remote shooting capability to actually go through the kind of thing of working with not only people they've worked with in the UK, but obviously international photographers as well. And I think that's definitely been an eye-opening experience for models as well, because it gives a different viewpoint. And I think every time you work with anyone, you come away with different ideas, whether or not that be ideas you'd want to work with on that with that model in particular, or just in general. And I think because there's been much more sharing ideas sort of internationally due to this lockdown, it's definitely made people more creative and give people different ideas. And from that point of view, I think it's only been a good thing, and I suspect it will remain even past the international lockdowns, because it's just so much easier that, in a time like if I'd have wanted to shoot with Scarlett or Michaela, I would have had to physically go to the US and then sort out logistics from there. Whereas now I can just literally, send them a message and we book a time. And while that sometimes means, working with international audience means you have to adjust the time that you can shoot to make best shoot it to the light. And yeah, I've seen myself still up at midnight doing shoots for Michaela, but it's always been so much fun. And even when they tour as well. So, I was looking up to shoot with Michaela when she went to Texas. So from that point of view, people traveling even internationally, it's still, even domestically, they can still offer that no matter where they are. I've seen signs of that from some models already that are planning to hopefully travel once lockdown restrictions are over to offer, remote shoots for that. And I think that's going to be an interesting take as things move forward. The remote events, obviously, in regards to the Creativity Hub, our good friends Nemo and Pippa, they've run a couple so far, Christmas and one earlier this year, and it's been hilarious, having met them both in person before and knowing how fun they are. But the logistics of that as well, I think in the Christmas event, every technical issue that could have happened, I think happened in that one shoot, which is the other side of, obviously, the stuff people don't talk about is that obviously, you are heavily reliant on the internet connection, so that can cause problems, and I've had that definitely shooting remotely in the Caribbean, especially on location, was where the internet connection could not keep up with the video to a point where, to a certain point, I was kind of shooting in the dark a little bit because the quality of the video couldn't keep up with giving me an accurate view. But obviously the photos that I got out of that was still amazing. So I was very lucky. But you just expect that, you know, when you're doing stuff on location remotely, you're likely are going to have a high failure rate. But to be fair, you could have that same prospect in person. I mean, I find my personal sort of rate is about 25% of most photos I take when I'm doing an in-person shoot are either out of focus or otherwise. Now, some of that, 9 times out of 10, tends to be directly related to my disability and the fact that I will probably move at the last second and my camera will lose focus. So it happens. I probably should use a tripod more, but I tend to find that using a tripod creates a very static viewpoint, which kind of isn't my style. I always look for the slightly different angle than what is probably normal. So I try and see where if we can get a different angle that just makes it look a little different. But like I said, everyone's got their own unique style, and that develops over time. And I think the more you work with people, the more you get ideas from people, the more it's just an evolution.
Because you've mentioned about tripods and stuff like that. Do you find that now maybe that's something you'll take into your in-person photography because you've experienced it remotely and you've seen the pictures that you can get? Do you think that's something you might look into doing in the future in person?
It's definitely something I've considered for my next in person. Is the bare minimum I'll try and shoot tethered where possible. Only because the fact that when the model can see the photo that's been taken, it helps them because they can see whether or not they like the pose they've just done, if there's anything they need to adjust. And I mean, obviously, I think we've both worked with some fairly, you know, especially when you're working with dancers, they definitely have critiques that you as a photographer, unless you're used to shooting dancers, would not see, and so it wouldn't be something that was forefront in your mind, something that you needed to correct. Which I've got to thank Poppy for that one, because that was something she definitely made me think about, which I'd never had done before. Which is obviously, dancers will see things that you won't, and it's always good. So I often try and take so many shots. Obviously, we'll do a couple of test shots to sort of zero in the settings. Then we'll see how it goes, and usually about every sort of 6 to 12 shots, I'll say, let's take a quick break. Let's have a quick look through what we've taken, you know, just in case there's a shot we need to retake or something we need to adjust and retake. It just gives people the chance to have a look, to see how they feel about it. You know, is it something, you know, if we've got enough shots in that set, or is it something we need to do some more of, or is there new ideas that spawn from whatever we've just taken? And that was the fun thing. I mean, even my last shoot with Eva Lana was very much like that. Was we took some shots, and then she's like, I actually want to try and get this shot, you know, and it ends up being very much a collaboration, which I really enjoy. I mean, I've done similar with Charlie, where we've ended up shooting some jewelry together. Just because she had to do it, and obviously it was at the end of a shoot we were doing, so we just kept going, and obviously I helped pause some of it and, you know, make sure the settings were right, and it just made for a fun end to the shoot. That was just something that was unplanned, unexpected, and that's kind of the way of it. And that's the thing you get when you work with models regularly. You know, you help to build up that trust. That's my feeling, is that you should try and build as much trust as you can with the people you work with, so that they know when they work with you that you know, it's an ease off their mind if they know that you're going to try and do the best photos possible. I mean, obviously every photographer is going to be on their journey from beginner to expert, if such thing really exists. But everyone has to start somewhere, and everyone's on a journey. And, you know, everyone you work with, I mean, photographer, model alike, they'll all bring something that will develop you. Every day is a skill day. You never stop learning. You never stop thinking about how could you change stuff. I mean, I look at stuff that I took even 12 months ago, and I think I would have probably edited that differently now. I would have taken that differently. I would have adjusted this. And I think that sort of, it's healthy to go back and critique yourself from the past, and just to see where you would adjust things. And like I said, from that, I've been very lucky enough to work with some outstanding models that have taught me so much, albeit indirectly, because many that I've worked with are very accomplished photographers in their own right, and they bring a different viewpoint to those models that aren't photographers yet. I think most of them are on that journey eventually to do it themselves. And I have said to 1 or 2 models that have never really picked up a camera before, with me next to in person, we'll do a role reversal, and I'll be the dodgy model, and they can learn how to work the camera. And I think sometimes that's the fun way to do it, to not be too afraid to sort of to switch things around. With the models, I usually, especially in remote ones, I ask them to usually give me a heads up if there's any particular ones they really prefer, and I try and make sure at least some of them are in my final list of editing ones. Just because I think that models often look at photos differently than photographers do, and I don't know if that's more of a gender thing or just that models see things differently. Obviously, the different sort of sides of the same profession, obviously, and viewpoints is I value them because I then look at the ones they select and think, okay, is this one I would have chosen myself, or is this one I would have sort of otherwise sort of rated lower? And it helps to kind of think it from the other side to sort of see how is your thinking on it. Are you judging things in the right way? Again, sort of falling back to being sort of critical about your work, I guess.
Yeah. But I think it's also a model sees pictures of his or herself differently than a photographer would, because obviously they've seen themselves in pictures thousands and thousands of times where we may have only seen them like during the shoot, and the model might pick up on something where we might miss it. So it's always good to get their input into a picture.
Yeah, I always do, which is why I like to do the reviews as we're going on. Even in person, I'm obviously a bit more difficult with social distancing, but where possible, I like them to see back of camera. I like them to regularly go through, see what they think. Where possible, even when I'm doing in person, I do try and take regular breaks. Obviously, when we do outfit changes and other things, where I will take, I will load up the photos onto like an iPad at the very least.
Yeah.
Sort of while I'm in the studio, just so I can check stuff's in focus. And
so I've seen with remote shooting as well, you've used the Kloss app. Am I saying that right? And how has that been? Because obviously with most aspects of remote shooting, you're using a digital camera where you can get the raw files. How is the experience of using the app and the results you've got from that?
Kloss is a funny one because it has evolved over the course of the last year. When I first started using it, it was limited functionality, but basically for those that aren't aware of it, it is basically like a cross between video conferencing and a remote shooting app. Now, as last year's gone on, it basically went from a place of going to the being able to take JPEGs, and they were stored on a model's phone and they would send you them afterwards. But as far as the practical applications you're using it is, you would basically start like effectively what people would recognize as like a Zoom call. You'd be able to see people face to face, and then obviously you would have controls that a photographer would expect. So you have some limited ability to set. Now, as things have evolved, you have the option to set what file type you want, which on definitely the more recent iPhones includes RAW. So obviously with that, they're quite large and they are stored on the model's phone, unless you are a subscriber now and you have access to their Pro cloud storage solution.
Okay.
However, as with everything, it's still evolving and it's not perfect yet. It has a few issues I don't agree with, in the fact that I can if you use the cloud storage option, you can as the photographer can see what you've taken, but you can't share that with the model, which I believe is something they are working on, because I have fed that back to them because I think that is really important. But it is very different than obviously operate. It's very much like taking a photo with your own phone, except there's a delay and you feel like you're button bashing a piece of glass, which is another interesting concept. You tend to find that in that sort of environment, you take a lot more shots. I mean, obviously, I've done 2 location shoots with Michaela in Turks and Caicos using it, as well as people sort of local, sort of in the UK as well. But talking about doing it remotely, and that was very interesting because obviously you're dependent on a 4 5G signal on the other side of the planet while you're at home in your comfy Wi-Fi. So, like I say, the video's not always perfect. You are reliant on either having a tripod or someone there to hold the camera. But that's not to say you can't get great shots, because you can actually get shots that are far above what you would call like a candid live action shot, because you can compose it. You can still compose it in the same way, and you still have the minor adjustments such as exposure. But the fact that you can shoot it in RAW and get the RAW format at the end means you have much more ability to manipulate it. I mean, I know there seems to be a very big difference in remote shooters as far as UK versus US preferences as far as file formats. So I'm well aware that Americans predominantly prefer JPEGs as their source medium for photos. I mean, obviously, a lot of the UK photographers that I know that shoot remotely, we all prefer to use RAW. So it is. There's a little bit of a difference in sort of file tastes. I'm wondering if that's because of obviously JPEG being a lot smaller. Because obviously, even on an older iPhone, you're still looking at raw files of well above 10 meg. I mean, obviously, compared to DSLR, that is small change. But the fact you still have the power with that. But yeah, it's the fact that you can basically take your phone to places you wouldn't typically be able to take a full laptop. Even if you had like a 5G portable modem, it's not practical to take that to the beach and to run tethered, and to be trying to do a video call plus, tethered shoot. It just isn't. It isn't practical for the model. Even if they had the assistance, because you would need at least one. So then obviously bumps up the cost of any shoot, dramatically. But yeah, I loved it. I mean, the fact we had great technical support from Mikhail's partner. But we did all sorts. We did stuff in the water. We did stuff on the beach. We've done a lot of different sort of looks with that. And some of it was more on the casual, playful side. Some of it was was a lot more thought out. But the fact you have that capability, of just basically having a phone and effectively off you go, which made it a lot easier in some regards for us to play around with styles, because there wasn't the need to carry massive amounts of gear, which I thought was just perfect. And it did have its downsides. There was times on one of the shoots where video was effectively so pixelated, I was struggling to see how the thing was composed. So at that point, you're just literally just button bashing and in the hope that you've got something you can use, which I did. I mean, I think on one of them, I think there was well north of 600 photos taken in probably what was an hour and a half. But the thing is, I did that because I knew I couldn't manually check the results. I mean, I would always prefer quality over quantity. I think when it comes to cloths, unfortunately, it ends up being you have to take the quantity to get the quality ones out of it. But I think sometimes that is indicative of most location shoots, because you don't always have the time. You're in an always changing situation when you're on location. So I think from that point of view, you just have to take the shots where you can get them and kind of hope to a certain degree you've actually got the one shot.
I'm just looking at the shots that you guys took, you and Michaela, and it's almost like, someone was there holding a phone, but it could have easily been you there with a camera taking a shot. Like you say, there's some of her in the ocean, on the beach and stuff, and it's just one of those amazing facts that you're literally there with a phone that normally you think might not get great results, but those could easily be, if you hadn't said they were remote shoot, you could have thought someone was just there with Michaela taking shots on a camera.
I actually was a bit cruel to a friend of mine when they said to me, you can't take as good of photos with an iPhone remotely as you could with a full DSLR. And so I basically, in this case, I took two photos. I took one I took with Michaela at the beach, and I took another one I'd done with Elle Baldwinson. And I sent them to him, and I said, which one of these was taken with a mobile? Unfortunately for him, they were both taken with a mobile. And I did it to prove the point, because obviously he obviously picked up and said the one shot with Michaela was done with a full setup, and I said, well, that wasn't true. And I said, in fact, both of them were taken with a phone, and I said, and they were both, easily print quality.
Exactly.
And the thing is, it's. I think what you get to the point now, and I say this to a lot of people, because when I first started shooting models, I was still using the same EOS 450 that I've had since it came out, which I think now is about 13 years old. It's a 12 megapixel camera. It's nothing special, crop sensor. But yeah, if you saw some of the photos that I've taken on workshops with the likes of Tilly Feather, you would think I'd taken them with a much higher grade camera, because you get to a point where, well, in certain cases, if you're doing stock photography, where the megapixels and the image matters as much, but it doesn't matter as much as the creativity that you as the photographer and the model dream up between you. Because the thing is, that's what matters the most. It's the concept you're shooting, it's how you're shooting it, it's how you're editing it, it's how it's presented to the world. Because you could take one photo of the same model and even just give it to 5 different photographers to edit. Every single one of them would come back with something completely unique, because it's how they view the world, how they go to edit it. And I often try to, where possible, leave as much a representation of the shot that we took as possible. But, and occasionally with Charlie, like the Ice Queen shoot, I tried to do things a bit differently. I took it in a bit more of a creative effect. And I mean, you look at other people that love to do composites, like Nemo, for instance. she really excels at that. It's not something that I would attempt to the level she does, but obviously she does, and she takes it to a different level. And when I shoot with her, we always we literally take wacky to a whole new level. I mean, I think a good example, probably just to go back to doing cloth shoots for a very quick second before I tangent off, it's very much, I've shot with several models that I've worked with in person, doing it remotely. And we've done some ones that, we've still got like Jennifer Barnsley, where it's been, where she's been at home, and, we've used lamps to, simulate colour gels. Using neon tops to really give it a different pop, and even in the same space, shot multiple times. I think in one case we actually took a whole bunch of clothes and literally just laid them on a wood floor. Okay. Got a tripod with a down with that, and attached the phone to a tripod on, hovering above her, and it works. It's the same sort of thing you'd do in person, except you'd obviously use a ladder or similar to get that shot, unless you're Jade, who happens to have the right tripod to do it without having to climb a set of ladders. But that's kind of the thing of how things have got creative. So I think from that point of view, it's definitely a thing. Just generally talking about creativity and remote shoots, two prime examples of that to me are definitely sort of some of the stuff I shot with Jade and also Nemo. Nemo has a real love for creating lens flares and to be using accessories in order to facilitate really wonderful sort of in-camera effects that you think are post-processed, and they're not. They're straight from the camera. Hovering stuff, spinning stuff around, putting stuff in places, and sometimes generally just pausing like
glitter balls and stuff like that.
Yeah. So many things. She's got code names for each and every one of them.
Well, speaking of Nemo, you've done a few events where, let's say it properly, you've done a few remote events. So let's take an example of the Creativity Hub, where they've done like remote weekenders, where there's been different themes. Do you see that as something when a company or group can do remotes again in person, that they'll take that forward, so it still leaves the possibility of disabled photographers or photographers who can't travel for one reason or another to still be creative doing events?
I hope so. I've seen it pop up a few places now where they're allocating certain amounts of event time to be purely remote slots. I think it's perfectly a great idea, because obviously sometimes I would love to go to certain events, and it's not necessarily the expense. It's more logistically, it's either logistics or time that I can't make. Obviously I live in the Lake District, so obviously I'm not exactly central, unless you're talking Scotland. So usually for me to take time out to do in-person shoots usually involves a certain degree of travel, unless obviously it's the Lake District and it's on my doorstep, but we don't get the weather for that, unfortunately, as much as a beautiful place as it is. So from that, it's great, because you can find a time that works best, and sometimes, unfortunately, with remote events, you do have to accept that some things will get shuffled around if there's technical issues, and I've had that a couple of times, which is fine. I think it's just, you got to go in remembering that this, obviously you're utilizing advanced technology, and from that, while that creates a wonderful world of opportunity and accessibility, it isn't without its problems, because nothing's perfect. So I think when my first remote weekender, I think was at Christmas, and just because of technical issues, the first slot I was meant to do with Pippa, couldn't happen while things were getting troubleshooted. Of which, to be fair, that shoot is a particularly memorable one for me, because poor Ricky, I think, got moved, and I think I ended up taking his slot. But obviously, off the back of that, with Pippa, I got an FPI off that. So. But luckily, I think for me, it was one of these where it was still a bit new for everyone trying to do an event of that type. And I think it was a grateful thing that I happened to be one of the people that had met, obviously, Nemo and Pippa in person and shot with them. So it was a bit easier to kind of, I'd already built up some level of rapport. And I think that is one thing I will say about remote shooting, is that you still have to focus on building that rapport with people that you don't have, because it's no different than being in person, except the only downside is you're not physically there. And that creates, an interesting dynamic in some ways that obviously for some models, this will present, obviously to a certain degree, a technological safety net for them, which has obviously been a big topic of conversation recently. But also by that is it's a lot more difficult for the models to necessarily read a photographer's body language the same, because obviously they're only seeing whatever's on screen. But I think it's just about communication throughout, whether that be in person or remote, is kind of key. But I definitely think it's created an interesting dynamic with being remote, and it's definitely something I hope continues, because I think it has the power to enable people of all abilities to be able to do it. Because people that would never touch the camera before in their life, never known what aperture is and shutter speeds, and now taking something up that they never would have thought before, because obviously the barrier to entry with photography, well, ultimately, most people should realize that it's literally a camera, whether that be the one on your phone or a DSLR or whatever. But I think people get a lot caught up thinking that they need every bit of latest gear on the planet, and they don't. I mean, to be fair, it's only within this last sort of 12 months that I've even got my own sort of flash and a few other bits and pieces that I've realized that I need in my toolkit for stuff that I like to do. But then you go to a studio, and if you get to some really good ones, they'll really help you out and really sort of guide you. And if you're lucky enough to shoot with a professional model that is a photographer as well, they can help guide them settings. But I have been lucky enough to be experienced enough to work with some models now shooting remotely that don't know how their camera works. They don't understand, what bit, they understand how to plug it in, turn it on. Yeah. And beyond that, you are kind of left to help them out. And, I have done that with some models. I've happily, taken time to fix problems I've had with the remote shooting setup, only because I thought it was the right thing to do. Because the thing is, it helps everyone. They'd obviously gone from moving from a mobile to a full tethered setup, and that was a new experience for them. And, they'd actually got a really decent camera, really quality lens, beautiful bit of kit. But when you don't understand how it works and how to make it work remotely, there's apprehension there. And I think sometimes, everyone needs a little help. So I'm always willing to help people out to make sure that they're happy and comfortable and they can use it. Because the thing is, the one thing I've definitely noticed, obviously, with the lockdowns and stuff, is that models can't shoot like they used to, and a lot of them are obviously self-employed. It's been tough for a lot of models that have moved into modeling recently that haven't been able to get the same support that maybe more established models have done. So this last year has been tough for a lot of people, and I think it's nice to support people and to kind of see how you can help them be creative, also supporting them as well. And I think that's definitely been sort of something that I've found worthwhile, because I've still got to be creative with people that that I know and that I have a lot of fun with. And we get some great images and we throw around some great ideas, and more often than not, you will come out with more ideas off the back of it, which is really good. And I mean, I've got a whole bunch of in-person shoots now sort of scheduled for this year. That are going to be amazing. And I think it's going to be different for me, because I'm going to have to switch from my style of remote shooting, where everything is kind of tripoded, all nice and stable, and I'm just operating my laptop one-handed, whereas I'm going to have to go back to actually operating a camera one-handed. And this is what I say by having a tripod is a good thing, but obviously when you're one-handed, obviously the logistics of moving even a tripod, it requires an effort of, you got to put the camera down and take the camera off the tripod and move it down, and think about sort of the angles as far as me physically getting down. Obviously, I mean, only full capability of one side, creates a whole bunch of challenges when you have to kind of hold a camera or make sure you're not about to drop a very expensive camera. While trying to get yourself into position. And, it slows proceedings down a bit, which I kind of factor in the time I allot for shoots. But I often find just go with the flow and see what the model also fancies doing. I just don't keep to a strict schedule. I was going to say, well, we might use this over here, try this. I still think some studios should probably come with a nice little platform for some models to stand on. So as poor souls, when we end up on the floor, have a little bit of wiggle room to work with. I will tell you about this. There was this shoot I did before, I forget which lockdown it was, before one of the lockdowns. And I was down south, and we decided we were going to do it in a hotel room. Just because I think at the time, like, most studios were like cancelling bookings. And it was really funny. The best way I can describe the setup was basically the lenses I took with me in order to get the shot against the window of the model I was shooting, Elizabeth. It ended up being where I was basically lying on the floor, just to get the camera angle for this shot. I think at the time, as soon as we took the shot, she kind of said, "I wish we'd had a second camera in here," because the best way I could describe it was basically the pink room from the pink room scene from The Wolf of Wall Street, and that was about pretty much the extent of it. And I literally had my camera completely on the floor. I was almost completely prone just to try and get this shot upwards, just so I could get her in shot. And it was one of those shots where there was no chance of seeing the viewfinder. Live view is next to useless, and it literally was almost like a Hail Mary shot, and it worked. And it's one of those where, sometimes you have to put yourself into uncomfortable positions to get the shot. But it was just funny, and it's always the stuff with photography. It's the behind the scenes, the stuff that people don't see. Either it's the funny stuff you have to do to get that one shot. In the case like Mr. Summers hanging the camera over the edge of a balcony just to get that shot. The funny situations you find yourself in with models just to get that shot, and it's always the laughs and the hilarity and the stuff that people don't get to see. They only get to see the
end result. Yeah,
is what you present to the world, but they don't get to see the outtakes. So the endless laughing because you've said something that has just kind of kick someone off laughing, cracking themselves up laughing.
The bad photographer jokes.
Oh, hang on, they were talking about me. When did that? But yeah, it's such an interesting thing to sort of. It's the one thing I do love about photography. For me, it's such a creative outlet, and so it's always kind of my ethos just to roll with it. And just to keep things chill. I mean, that's it. Everyone as long as everyone's comfortable, safe, happy, and enjoying themselves. What more do you want?
I definitely think it comes across in some of your work because I'm literally looking. Say, recently you did a shoot with Cheryl Elizabeth, and like those balloon shots are like epic. I've got to say that. Where obviously you can see that she's relaxed and she's willing to put her hand up to the camera, have balloons around her, and you could just see she's happy to be being creative and taking the pictures. And that's even more an aspect where it's like it's all done remotely. So that's something where I would say you've excelled much more than a person in person could do it.
Yeah, that shoot was an interesting one because it was originally had to be rescheduled last minute, which wasn't a problem for me. But obviously, the funner part of that was when we started discussing what to shoot. It was really difficult to sometimes when you're working with someone for the first time, which I wasn't in that case. Although I'd obviously met her previously, obviously due to the socials, so I already knew her quite well. But it's sometimes people, they'll say to me, what do you want to shoot? And I'm like, it's kind of one of these things that I take my cues from the model's comfort with me, because I know I've been lucky enough to work with some models that now predominantly will not accept doing art nude shoots. But if I was to ask them, I know they'd say yes. So I'm very lucky at that I have that level of trust with models that I work with. But I used to take the cues from how they feel, going back to my thing about obviously not every model will work at every level with every photographer. And I take the cues I have from how they feel and their comfort level with me, which I think it's the safest way to be. So I think we were talking, and I kind of said, well, because I knew she had a lot of sheer material. I said, well, how about we basically just play on the word sheer as a general theme, and then we ended up with balloons,
as you do,
and it really worked out well. And it's just all about you have a laugh. I more often than not tell some funny stories because I happen to have a few. I was very fortunate through my day job to travel to various places internationally. So I have a lot of funny stories because crazy things seem to happen to me wherever I go, which is part of the fun sometimes. Yeah. And one of the things I've missed during lockdown is getting out and about to see my friends and do fun things with them. So with that, obviously, it's useful. I find it's useful to tell a few stories, not necessarily get personal, but if you've got a funny story that you think will make people feel at ease,
exactly,
they might enjoy. It's obviously it's nice to sort of be less sort of boredom. I mean, obviously, my style with remote shooting is I try to count the models in. I try to tell them when I'm focusing, so they know when to pause, when to blink. Because I think one thing that kind of took me back a little bit was one model I was working with, and she kept apologizing for blinking. And I was a bit taken back, like, why are you apologizing for blinking? Like, that's going to happen. Like, even if I was in the room with you right now, that would still be the case.
Yeah, it happens with normal photography as well. I'll catch sometimes a model just happens to blink as you press the shutter. So yeah, that's something that occurs both in person and remotely.
But I think it's more something that seems to be expected less of with our transatlantic cousins. I think it seems to be more of a thing that I've heard from sort of dealing with American photographers that's been experienced. I'd like to say if someone catch you, if they're blinking at the same time, fine. If they're moving, you just retake the shot, because what I often do when I'm doing remotely is I tend to find there's between 3 and 5 seconds between me pressing something my side and actual action on the other side. So the first few shots you're taking, it's basically you counting down, basically how long you need to count in or when you need to press. In relation to your countdown to get that shot, which I just think is hilarious. I mean, it was a great thing. I mean, I have had a few minor pitfalls with remote shooting, and I think the biggest one I have to date, which wasn't as far as technically getting the images because the images were amazing, which was working with Sienna Hayes. And I think it was my first time shooting. I think it was with a Sony. And basically I shot with a wider format file. So I think it was was it 10 by 9 or 60 by 9 format, which I thought, oh great, because that means I'm going to get, we're going to be able to get better full lengths. Little did I think about that at the time. So I got a whole bunch of photos which are absolutely amazing and full length, but getting them printed suddenly becomes a very much more of a bigger problem. Because obviously it's a non-standard sort of print format, so it ends up being something gets cropped or you have to effectively crop it, or you end up having a lot of white space. So it's you live and learn with these things. But to be fair, I could have made the same mistake in person as I did with that. But again, that was quite interesting because that was another remote shoot that was a model in Canada, and the actual location was an amazing Moroccan themed studio. And that was just another one where it was really interesting because it was, again, first time working with someone completely new. And it's a bit like when you meet anyone for the first time with that, that's in any sort of social interaction of any kind or in a business setting where, you very quickly in the first 5 minutes trying to work out sort of what sort of person are you dealing with. And I think that remote shoots have highlighted the fact that communication is still king throughout. I think with that, it's kind of a lot of time. It's working out. Do you want a prescribed set of ideas, or do you just want to roll with the flow of whatever happens on the day? That's everyone's choice of how they want to approach that. My number one is basically everyone having fun, because the thing is there's a time investment in doing remote shoots as well as sort of a monetary one. And I think ultimately that kind of. While people think, it's someone's full-time job, and that is completely right, that doesn't mean they can't have fun while they do their job. Some people want to be serious, other people want to be fun. I just try and create a fun working environment, because I'm thinking if the other person's miserable, then I'm going to feel miserable. And
it's going to come across in the pictures, isn't it? Yeah. So moving on to how you approach a model, how do you get the ideas you'd like to capture? Do you use a mood board, or is it just an email to a model?
It can be a mixture sometimes. I mean, obviously, sometimes what inspired me to work with a model is sometimes, their look that they have, or something I've seen that kind of inspired me to do, something different with them. But more often than not, it depends how I know them. Sometimes that'll be, obviously Purple Port, I'll shoot them a message. Apply to a casting, or I will, if I happen to know them, I'll ping them on social media. And usually we'll book something in. Then sometimes it'll be kind of, I'll throw out an idea, like some of them, I think with Carla, I think we sort of described sort of an old sort of Hollywood glamour kind of theme. And obviously she said she had obviously a big Fresno light, which was perfect. She had the dresses. We also threw in sort of, we did almost, best way to describe it like it is like an artist muse kind of vibe, obviously with sort of painter's canvas and stuff. And it's I find it's kind of best for me as a photographer, because obviously, especially remotely, I don't know what they're working with, what they have as far as outfits and sort of accessories in their space as well, unless I've shot with them before. So I'll often just throw out a rough idea or a couple of ideas for some multi-hour shoot. I try, and my personal sort of guidance is try to keep like one look to about 20 minutes, half an hour, and then move on. Sometimes that completely just goes out the window, but you just expect that. But if that's kind of the ballpark I run to, then people can kind of, it gives them a bit of a gauge as to what we might get through. And I've worked with some models where we've got through a lot more than that, but it just depends, on how we feel about the end result shots. Have we got enough early on, or do we need to spend some more time? So yeah, it really depends. Sometimes we'll throw out a mood board, or I'll select one that they may have already published. I always try, and at least on the first shoot of working with a model, is make sure that whatever we're shooting is something, either it's a concept they really like, or it's something they've done before. So I know that they're not going to be, it gives them that time to get to know me and be comfortable with me before we move on to any levels that might be more intimate, shall we say. So I tend to do that, where I keep things kind of, make sure that ultimately they're comfortable with me, because it's not always the case. And while you could say that's their job and they accept that, they should. By the same token, it's going to show in the photos if they're not happy or not comfortable, and I don't want that. So I like shooting with me to be a fun experience.
Yeah, and you've been respectful to the model as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the number one rule always. Which unfortunately we hear too many stories of that not being the case, which is very saddening. Very saddening to me, at least, because most of the models I know with are absolutely fabulous models and even better people. So I'm very lucky with some of the people that I've shot with, and some that I've only shot with a few times have become such amazing friends outside of sort of the model photographer relationship. That I'm very, very fortunate to know such amazing people. And I think once you get to know them, you realise that while most people generally, by and large, outside of the photography community will think a model's just a pretty face, they often don't get to see the depths that a model has, because a lot of models are very intelligent. They're all very intelligent women. A lot of them are photographers themselves. A lot of them, there's a lot more depth to them than people even think, but that's the same with any human until you get to know them. But I think it's definitely more apparent that I've got to meet some amazing people, some interesting stories, and they've taught me things as well. And that's I think that's part of sort of sharing the whole experience with someone is it's what I typically when you deal with people, if you can learn from them and you can teach them something, that share of information makes everybody better. And that doesn't really matter what field you're working, whether that's photography or any other field. You should be open to doing that, but unfortunately not everyone is. And there will be some people that are very guarded about how they do stuff, but I'm like, no, just try it. Sometimes my method is you learn by doing, trial and error.
And if it doesn't work, you move on. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's always my thing with any ideas that I throw out, because sometimes, obviously, if we're winging it, as it were, I will sometimes say, look, I'll get an idea. Like literally, I'll be mid-shoot, I'll just have a little idea that pops in my head. What I usually say to the model is, unless it's someone I sort of know very well, is I'll say, look, I have a habit of like, my brain will think of something, I will throw an idea out. If you really don't like the idea, fine, say so, and next idea, move on. But if it's something you fancy trying as well, we'll give it a whirl. And I do it like that. And I always say, I'm not. I like to experiment with photography. So I'm never afraid to fail, because failure just means you found something that doesn't work.
Yeah, and then you've learned from that experience as well.
Or you may have found something that you never thought would work that actually turns out to be a class idea.
Exactly.
But you don't know until you try. So, never say never. Just like I say, it's one of these things where you just have to be open to new ideas and just see what happens. I mean, I've had models come to me and say, I really want to try this. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's go. And, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to experiment with any ideas they have that they've not tried. I mean, that probably seems like a hard thing, but sometimes from my experiences that it's not as frequent as maybe I expect it to be. I mean, it's pretty easy when obviously you've got when you've got a model and photographer partnership. Obviously, you got Rochelle and Mr. Summers. You've got Team Black. So they obviously cover off a lot of the ideas they have amongst themselves. But even sometimes they can't get through every idea that they would like in the time they have. So sometimes it's fun just to take an idea they've been mulling around for a while and just rolling with it. And I like that collaboration. Like even in remote shoots, one thing that isn't really discussed is often that the model's partners are often the tech support.
Yeah.
And I often say to them, because I know one or two, and they're in the background and they're pretty quiet. And I'm like, no, we're going to have a conversation. It's going to be a three-way conversation. I expect that your partner's going to chime in. I mean, Michaela and her partner Martin. Yeah. I chat with them both, and it's part of that thing where we're chatting together. It's never one or the other. It's
a team trying to get to the same point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes life easier because you can have a joke with everyone, and it's I think it's fun because you get to meet people. And the thing is, I know some photographers maybe don't prefer to speak to the tech support. I don't know. Me personally, I just think it should just be one big collaboration, one big conversation. just enjoy the time as it stands, because I think that, I think there is a lot of unsung heroes in sort of partners and models during remote shoots that are doing a lot behind the scenes that people don't see. I mean, obviously you got people like Kira, who I haven't worked with yet, that obviously does it all herself, and I know a few like that. And it's kind of I've also seen as well, models with mobile tripods stacking books up on a coffee table to get the right height for the shot. Completely natural light. No reflectors, nothing, sometimes up against the wall. And luckily for me, it's people that I've worked with, so they're less worried about working with me remotely, because it's not something they typically offer, and it's not something they've done much of. So it's, sometimes they just want somebody to give it a try with. And I've done that with a few models during lockdown that have not done remote shoots or offered them publicly, but I've done them with them just to give it a try. In fact, I've got one case, I think, was Elizabeth, where literally I was at home on a Sunday afternoon. It was right when we'd had a lot of snow, and she literally messaged me saying, "I've got snow," and I went, "That's good, you enjoying it?" And she's like, "Yeah, but I really want to be outside shooting in the snow." Yeah. How do you do these things called remote shoots? Okay, So we ended up firing up Kloss, and you'll probably find, actually, to be fair, you'll probably find a couple on my profile if you go look. And basically ended up taking a tripod with a phone attached, booting up Kloss out into a garden, and basically took some shots of her in heels and black lingerie in the snow. But I mean, like with that, it was very candid, very sort of casual. I mean, how can I put it? There's only so much you can work with in someone's garden that hasn't been prepped. I mean, we all can't be like a certain model we know that has everything sort of perfect, even in a garden, despite the effort that involves. Naming no names, Michelle. But with that, we did what we could, and we had fun with it, and it was something, because I mean, instantly as a photographer, especially not being there in person, I'm like, what's the temperature like? Because I'm like, you're going to be outside, minimal clothes. We need to kind of make this snappy, because if it is cold where you are, like, I'm not having, I don't want it on my conscience that you're basically going to be, get hypothermia or worse as a result of trying this. And she was okay, thank goodness. And it was just, it was so fun. I mean, unfortunately, because we were using Kloss and the timing issue, because we were trying to actually get a shot, which we unfortunately failed to do, which was trying to get a shot of her blowing snow to the camera. And we just couldn't do it. We couldn't get the timing right, and we couldn't even get it to like high speed shutter enough to be able to pull it off. And we were just like, next time there's snow and there's no things, and we'll redo that. But that's where remote shooting has its limitations, is that you can't do the same stuff you would in person. Like in person, that would be fine. You would compose a shot on a tripod. You would either have a quick release button, or you would just set a high speed shutter and just press it. And you'd be good to go. But obviously you don't get that with mobile apps, and it's not practical.
But at least you tried.
But we give it a whirl, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was something that, while it isn't something she chose to do more of, it was one of those that were like, it still was a good memory. It was a fun Sunday afternoon that nobody intended to have. But it was a lot of fun, and I love it. I mean, this is the fun thing about knowing such amazing people, is that sometimes they will reach out to you for doing stuff, and it's not something initially when I first started doing this, I was always kind of the approach that because of my disability and being somewhat less able than most people, I always took the approach of, it was easier sort of, for me, for my own personal sort of feelings, was easier to sort of pay for a shoot, just because then if I screw up, it's on me. Rather than doing sort of time for, where someone's given up their time to shoot with me, and it's on me to deliver at that point, or it's both to deliver, but mainly then I want less sort of technical hiccups from my side, or physical hiccups from my side. And that was a very different sort of mindset for me, whereas a lot of people start with sort of time for and sort of gain their experience that way. So I sort of I did it the other way, but by the same token, I got to work with some people that were very, very patient with me, which is fun. We get to laugh about it. I often make a joke about, more often than not, I end up on the floor more than the models, which is pretty true. But it's sort of, I took that approach just because it made me feel better that I was valuing someone's time, less amount, which nowadays isn't necessarily the case. But when you're first learning, and I think that's the other side of the thing, is while I'm not sort of full-time professional doing this. I kind of do it. I've been doing it as a hobby, but I may do it a bit more, try and be a bit more professional this year. But it does beg the question with the other side is, a lot of people say, a professional is someone that does it full-time being paid for it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily have an indication of sort of technical expertise or in fact a quality of image, which I think other ones of our esteemed photographer colleagues have highlighted. And I think that is definitely the case. And it's one question that in any industry is, aside from being paid to do something, is, what defines you as expert? How do you know where you are on your journey? Are you, because probably in some aspects now, I'm probably still a beginner in certain areas of photography, but in others, some people might call me intermediate or advanced. It's at what point, it's where the people draw that line other than your own personal sort of view of how where you were. And I mean, I'd say sometimes you get some people, you see new people creating, portfolios, and you often, you go and look at someone that says that they're, a full-time professional photographer, and you look at their work and you're like, okay, where do I measure up against that? And there is that kind of a thing, in any industry, imposter syndrome is a thing.
Exactly.
And it's always the thing I try to think is that, if you look at basically where you were 12 months ago, are you better now than you were 12 months ago? In which case there's progress, and there should always be progress. And it's pretty much the oddity I say to people whenever people say to me, about, the odd one that comes up is obviously yoga. And like, I know a lot of people and they go, I can't do yoga. People look at me and laugh at me if I go to a yoga class. And I often turn around to them and said, as someone who's basically only got full use of one side of his body, I often say to them, go, and you think I really have, you think like I don't have a problem there. Yeah. But the one thing you learn in yoga is basically to listen to your body and do what you can. And I have 1,000,001 different modifications I do for certain poses just to make it practical for me to do a little bit. But what you suddenly realize is that nobody cares about you. They're too busy working on themselves. But the thing is, if you are better tomorrow than you were yesterday, then there's progress. And the progress needs to be you and your individual journey. And I think with any profession, that is the same. But I think it's so easy to compare yourself. And I mean, the way I look at it is I try and find people that inspire me. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I look at some of the work you've done with some people that I've worked with and people that I still want to work with and I haven't had a chance to yet. And you look and you think, it's amazing. I mean, you look at people, like Russell James, does a lot of work with, the Victoria's Secret models and has done for a number of years. And you look at their work and you think, technically, wow, it's amazing. And it's quite clear the relationship he has with the people that he works with because of obviously the shots that he gets. But you suddenly realize that once upon a time, he was a guy with a camera. Yeah. He was a guy that was starting out. He didn't all of a sudden overnight become, this, well-known, successful photographer, and I think very few of us will ever make that level. And I think originally when I started photography in the first place, it was all about capturing a moment in time. It was never about, working in portraiture or working with, famous models, or it was just about capturing a moment in time, a memory, and having that memory preserved in what was film before digital. And that's all photography used to be, is capturing that moment in time, that event. And I've been at places where the only camera I had access to was my phone, and I still managed to get some awesome photos of memories of points in time, stuff that I now look back on, and think, wow, I was there, but also something to share the world with people. I mean, the one thing I do a lot of when I travel for work is I always bring little mementos and stuff back for my niece. And with that, it's mainly to be, I've been somewhere, I've got something to show you, usually it's stuff like currency and stories, and I'll go out and I'll take things, I'll have little adventures and try and get these stories, these memories and capture them on film, video, just stuff to, to show the world, and just memories that you have, stuff that future generations will look back on when the world's very different. I mean, if we want to take that as a case, just look at the last 12 months. Yeah. Little did we think 12 months ago the world would change overnight, and it has. But a lot of us now looking back to the year, to 2019, thinking how the world was versus now, and a lot of us are itching to be back, to be back shooting in person, to be able to, hug our friends and family, and and have fun, go on holiday, and them days will return. What we will have is all of the photos that were taken during this time of the lockdown, of the creativity and the ingenuity that people have taken to still remember the time that we had where the world was severely restricted. It's not a time I will forget anytime soon. I've got plenty of stories surrounding the start of lockdown. Because obviously for the start of lockdown for me, I was due to travel internationally, funny enough, to China, and my travel got cancelled about 3 days before I was due to travel. And it was literally just before China went into its lockdown. So I always remember stuff like that because it was a time that, I almost ended up in a lockdown in China had I traveled. And, some things like that will stick with you. As I'm sure many people have very similar stories. And unfortunately, this lockdown, this last 12 months, taken a lot from a lot of people. But I'm hopeful that, remote shoots are here to stay and that, people's lives will be better very soon. It won't be perfect for a while, but it should hopefully improve.
So when you're doing remote shoot, what do you find has been the best length of time for you? Is it 2, 3, 4 hours?
Definitely a minimum of 2 hours leading up to 4. Depending on obviously time zones and stuff, but I tend to find minimum of 2 hours because obviously you have to allow a little bit of time, especially if it's someone you haven't worked with before. You need at least a good 20 minutes, half an hour to get your first set out the way, even if it's just, introductions and stuff. And I expect that, ultimately at least half an hour will be lost just through the flow of things, which you wouldn't, which to be fair, you would still have in person, but remotely it's much more vital in my book to have that introduction, the time, even if it's someone you shot with before, because you'll be wanting to catch up, see how people are doing, the usual stuff you would do it in person. And I think that's worthwhile. So I usually aim for at least 2 hours, sometimes 4, and that works out to be, anywhere in between that can be good. My advice is just don't worry about getting massive number of shots. Just focus on the quality, focus on getting it as right as you want it to be. Review them together. I mean, I know some photographers don't necessarily feel like they need that feedback, but the model might appreciate that insight into what you've captured, how you've captured it, because everyone has obviously their own different styles of how they shoot, how they want it exposed, and the various other technical settings, because that varies as unique as fingerprint from photographer to photographer. But and mainly just have fun. Just don't worry about the time too much because it'll soon pass. It always does very quickly.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Sometimes
if you feel like you need to get through certain things in the time you have together, set a timer. But don't stress if you overrun. It happens. Most models understand that. I mean, I've had many a model that we've overrun in time, but to get the shot, they've even given me extra time to allow us to get that shot that even they had in their head. It varies by the model you're working with and obviously your relationship with them. But, if they want that shot too, they're going to work with you to get it.
So thanks for doing the podcast. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at deanm.photography.
Well, cheers, Dean, for doing the podcast. It's been very insightful. So I'm hopeful that people will enjoy all the information you've given.
Thank you very much for having me. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Right, so the first thing I'll just do say hi, Gary. Hi, Gary. Hi, Dean. Thanks for doing the podcast. If people don't know who you are, can you give a brief? There we go. Let's try this again. Right, come on. And I really want to burp, but I don't know if I'm going to.